Welcome to the lab. My name is Joe, and today I'll be decoding a Blackstone oil report. And here we have the Blackstone Labs oil report. It's a one-of-a-kind presentation of the data in an easy-to-understand manner. Now, there's a lot of numbers we're going to break down here, so stick with me. We're going to go through the sections one by one. To begin, we need to break down some clerical details. They play a crucial role in making sure that we both have all the information necessary to perform a complete analysis, and of course, give you a reference point for your client information down the road. Starting at the top, we have lab number, which is specific to the sample that you sent in. Then moving down, we also have make and model of whatever you sampled, so engine, transmission, etc. We are going to get specific here because the make and model plays a role in averages, but more on that later. We're going to break down fuel type. This, of course, is very important if you're someone who is running leaded fuel or unleaded. We also have details like the oil type, because depending on the kind of oil you use, we're going to have different parameters, and the oil is going to need to fit these should be values in order for us to give it the sign off or say that it held up nicely. Then we have the oil use interval. Typically, customers are tracking miles or hours, but we can make it specific to what you're doing. So if you're racing, you're tracking things like laps or passes, whatever it may be, we can get specific with the oil use interval. We, of course, want to know this information because that way we can do a per mile comparison. We can do a per hour comparison between the various samples you're sending in. So be sure to include the interval on any particular sample. Now, one other portion I want to break down in the unit box is the additional info. Now, here's where we're going to house details such as modifications, whether or not you have a system like, say, bypass oil filtration added on. These are modifications that are there to stay, so nothing temporary. This is if you add a new part, maybe you replace a turbo, maybe it's a rebuild. We want to have details that will make a lasting impression on whatever it is that you are sampling. So be sure to let us know if we're looking at a rebuild, if we're looking at, say, an engine with a lot of aftermarket parts, include those details and we will include them in the additional info section. Dropping down to client information. Now, we need to know client information, obviously, in order to deliver this report to usually your email. We can mail a hard copy as well, fax if you need that too, but we need contact information such as the phone number. This plays such a critical role in filling in the blank. Sometimes we have a sample arrive with a blank slip. Sometimes we have results that are outright concerning. We want to give, say, an aircraft owner a heads up about results that are troubling. Whatever the case may be, make yourself available with a phone number or email address. Obviously, if you want that report emailed, we have to have that address handy, but there are other means to deliver that report. Address info, obviously important for delivery of kits or your next sample. Now, the comment box. If there's one aspect of our report that sets us apart from everyone else in the rest of the industry, the one aspect that keeps people coming back, the comment. Now, this is not only where we're going to describe problems or the lack thereof, it's where we're going to try and do so in layman's terms. Not every problem under the sun will register in the used oil. However, if it is related to poor wear, harmful contamination, the oil or filter not working properly, you are not going to be the detective in your own mystery. Here we provide an example of an oil report for a new engine. You can see that we described things like metals that were high. We also broke down what we expect to see going forward, as well as a little bit about averages and what they're based on. Now let's jump down to the elements. We're going to keep talking about the comment here, but I want to do so in the context of the results. So you have the results in this sample in the far left column. This is the data we pulled from this particular oil sample. Now next to it we have unit location averages. You can see they're a replica of the values in the far left column, and that makes sense because unit location averages are going to be based on only the samples you've sent in from a particular make and model. Now, right now, that unit location average column is a 1 of 1. There's only one sample to reference. As such, it's a replica. But as more samples from this engine join the file, you will see that unit location average column begin to form a specific set of averages for this client's results. Now, jumping over to the far right column, universal averages, that gives you a reference point for other engines of this specific make and model that we have seen. That gives you a baseline that we expect an engine to resemble once it leaves residual wear-in and sealer behind, or think about what an engine should look like that's not going through a serious mechanical problem, not dealing with harmful contamination. Now, this is not a rule, it's not a goal necessarily. We understand that not every engine is going to wear alike. As such, we rely on trends, we rely on a unit location average column. That way we have more than one guideline. It's also what sets us apart from others in the industry. The highlights on this sample are mainly just to point to areas that we expect to improve. They aren't areas that we would want to label a concern. These are not areas that we want to raise alarm. Rather, we're just pointing out what we expect to get better. And if you send in a sample to another lab, they're going to point out high levels, but maybe leave it at that. Maybe you'll learn where those metals are from, but will they understand the context of wear-in, a low mileage engine? Will they understand that not every engine is going to wear alike? Not necessarily. That is another aspect of the Blackstone difference. Now I want to jump down to physical properties because these also play a big role in understanding how your oil performed during the oil run. First things first, we're talking about the viscosity. Now we present the viscosity in two different ways: Seybolt universal seconds and then centistokes. Depending on who you are, you might need to report a certain value, or you might have a certain spec you're trying to follow. So we provide both the Seybolt universal seconds and centistokes, so that way you have multiple reference points depending on what sort of spec you're trying to follow. It's the same thing, just presented two different ways. Now, let's move on to the flash point. This is how we determine if a solvent-based contaminant such as fuel is present. Now, you can see we have a should-be value that is a guideline. We want a flash point above 385 degrees for this particular oil. If the flash point is below that spec, then it speaks to contamination being present, and then we can arrive at a percentage based on how low that flash point was. So in this case, you want a flash point that is well above the should-be value. Now let's move down to antifreeze. Now there is an antifreeze calculation provided in the physical properties section. However, that is based upon the levels of potassium and sodium in the spectral results. So if you see 0.0% antifreeze present in the sample, then that would speak to potassium and sodium being low enough to rule out any measurable coolant contamination. Now we're also going to check for actual water because of course you can get water from antifreeze, but that's not the only source of water, and therefore we want to check for any moisture at all. And then if we find indicators of antifreeze coupled with that, then we'll be sure to note as well if the water appears to be antifreeze or if it could be introduced another way, maybe during sampling, for example, or say you're an aircraft owner and the engine has been sitting, then you could simply have condensation that didn't get cooked off before the oil change. Whatever the case may be, we understand that there can be water from antifreeze, but not necessarily all the time. Below water, you can see insolubles. Now, insolubles are important because they speak to how much solid material is present. Now, you want a low insolubles level, and the way you arrive at a low insolubles level is from the oil filter working effectively. So an insolubles result below 0.6% is exactly what you want, as that speaks to the oil filter not being used up. Now we have some additional testing. We have TBN, TAN, and ISO code. Now these values will always be left blank unless you have specifically requested a TBN, TAN, or ISO code. You might know the ISO code better by the name particle count or ISO cleanliness code. Now, if you want a particle count, if you want a TAN or a TBN, each additional test result will be reported on the same report page and will explain what the value meant. So a TBN, for example, that's strong would speak to there being plenty of active additive left. A TAN, which is total acid number, well, you want to see a low value because that would speak to the oil not being overly acidic. Now we have the particle count. This mainly applies to gear lubes or hydraulic oils. engine oils, we can try to run a particle count, but it's not terribly useful. Each individual test will be reported on the page and will include the result in the comment along with the necessary commentary that applies to that result. Again, think of the comment box as your guide. If we have not mentioned a particular result in that comment box, then you can be sure it's not a glaring concern. It's nothing that we expect you to correct on your own. And in the comment, we will leave you with a direction to go. If we see what looks like a potential problem, we'll be sure to note that, as well as inspection tips to follow. If you have mentioned an interest in extended oil use, the comment box will contain an interval recommendation. If we think you need to go shorter, again, it's going to be in the comment box. If you're ever feeling lost in the numbers, always return to the comment. Now, of course, you're always welcome to investigate the remaining details that we have not covered in the comment. If you want to know more about what certain elements are, for example, I didn't break down too much about elements such as calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and zinc. Well, these are oil additive. And for more on where these elements are from, as well as the individual tests we run, you can of course reference the report explanation on our website. But rest assured that if there's something that we felt like you needed to address on your end, we will first address it in the comment. And there you have it, an oil report the Blackstone way, with the personalized approach that your engine deserves. Thanks for watching.